The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kim Cordum, and I'm the Senior Director of Business Development for advisory and consulting firms at CAST. And I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar, Take the First Steps Towards Transforming Your Apps into Cloud Native. Before starting the webinar, I want to share some information in terms of logistics. You will receive a copy of the presentation and the recording of the webinar shortly after. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. Now, while CAST is a leader in software intelligence, we're not going to be able to get you to the cloud on your own. For that, you need partners. And so it's my pleasure to introduce you to our partner for this webinar, Keyva. And also, I want to introduce you to Anuj, who is the CTO of Keyva. So Anuj, please introduce the audience to Keyva and to the speakers on the webinar today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you all for joining this afternoon. Hopefully the session will give you some insights into some of the topics we're going to talk about, primarily around how to decide which applications to target first and how to take the step towards moving them or transforming them into cloud native. Keyva is a company that is focused on providing services around activities of DevOps and application migrations, as well as we build our own intellectual property that accelerates the adoption of platforms like CAST. So we'll take a look at what sort of, based on our past experience, what sort of challenges customers have had when they take on the activity of application migrations. It can seem overwhelming, as well as how Keyva can help in that domain. And then joining me is Kevin Fioret from CAST, who will also do a deep dive on the CAST platform and some of the things it has to offer. So the first things, if you have an initiative going on within your organization that is focused on identifying what applications you want to target first to convert or transform into cloud native, you may have a lot of questions to begin, right? Where do you start? So obviously, one of the aspects is there's a lot of applications. How do I decide? How do I get to the one that I want to start with first, a smaller scale maybe, and then you do a form of a proof of concept, and then you scale it out to, you may have thousands of applications, some of them homegrown, some of them commercial apps. So let's take a look at what are some of the factors, and by no way is this an exhaustive list, but it kind of gives you an insight into what we see in the field that clients are challenged with and some of the questions they have when they take on such an activity. So the very first thing that comes up is, here's my process on how I manage or make releases to my application, or how I deploy my application. What's going to happen to it when we transform that app to cloud native? What are the different protocol considerations that I need to take into account? And what that means is, how will users interact with the app? Where will app be placed? How will it be accessed? And so on and so forth. You may be a medium to a large sized organization that may have thousands of applications. And again, many of them would be custom developed internally, while some of them would be commercial apps. You may have a number of unique applications, and you can club applications based on some of the properties, like you may have divided functionality that you're trying to achieve using these applications into similar modules in a way. So it's easy to say I have 5,000 applications, but you may just be mirroring maybe 20% of them based on a particular type of architecture. But then again, you may have uniqueness associated with those applications. They may be built on different technologies. You may have different team owners. The way, like I mentioned, the way you deploy these apps and you make code releases to these apps will be different. There will be different tool sets associated with managing the environment, with managing these applications. You may have already made a ton of investments in terms of time, money. Maybe you have trained your staff to work on a specific code language or something else. There may be a bunch of customizations that you've been doing to your applications over the course of years. These applications may be integrated with other tool sets to make releases, maybe integrated into your release management system, your change management system, your CMDB. You may also have challenges around the timelines, and what that means is you may have a target to finish moving 5,000 applications by the end of the year, but you're still kind of stuck on, okay, what things I need to consider to get started on this? What are my priorities? When do I start? How will that be broken out into chunks, into phases? And then what are the different, how much time am I going to require from different team members? You may have scalability considerations. And what that means is, as you transform some of these apps, are they going to be scalable to the extent that they are today? You obviously don't want to lose functionality. You don't want to lose the availability, but you also got to consider how will the app be able to scale and address the needs of your organization. Security considerations are usually top of mind for clients that are trying to move on-prem applications that have been hosted on-prem for years and decades into the cloud. So that's more of an upfront activity to figure out what sort of cloud platforms allow you the ability to have those sort of security guidelines around which the application will be deployed. Cost consideration is another key one that comes up, I'd say, almost every time, where what's the additional software you may need, hardware you may need. You need new people, new skills, how much time is it going to take, and then training of staff. So again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but just some of the things, some of the overwhelming factors that you may be considering when you think about the migration project. So that's just at the beginning. Now you may also have questions around, after you get done with this, what is the desired outcome? What is the end state? One of the first things, and everybody may have a slightly different definition to what cloud native is, but understanding that in the context of your application, in the context of your organization is going to be key. What teams will be leading this effort? Again, you may not need a complete reorg within your organization, but you need to identify specific teams that are going to lead this transformation process. You'll probably need to make changes to the application code base, and not just the code base, but also around the process, the tooling, the methodologies that are used for these applications. How long will this effort take? When will it end, right? So dividing it into these chunks that are easily consumable by the organization. And then, the other question, which is where Keyva can assist, is can the assessment and the discovery process be automated? So our goal at Keyva is to try and automate portions or as much as we can of this transformation process, leveraging CAST, so that once you do the proof of concept in a way, once you have to identify maybe 1 or 2 or 5 apps that you run through, what are these factors that may be common across your entire application portfolio that can be automated so that the entire process flows smoothly. And then what's going to be the strategy for ongoing maintenance and updates? So once you have transformed these apps into cloud native, the entire paradigm changes for how these apps are going to be monitored, how they're going to be deployed, how will the releases be made, who will own these applications, where will they reside. The entire day 2 aspect, if you will, for these applications needs attention. So as we see, there's so many questions, and together with CAST, Keyva can help answer some of them. Obviously, there's going to be an exercise needed internally within these organizations to help identify some of these responses to some of these questions. But CAST is a platform that can help you visually see what sort of specific characteristics of the application and help you make decisions that are informed, and then help you prioritize which business critical applications you want to target first. So it gives you a bunch of information using characteristics of the various applications that you have in your portfolio and help you deciding where to start first and which ones are the most ripe to even go through the transformation. Because there may be some applications in your environment that will likely not be transformed into cloud native. So, and then also on the other side, so that's one piece of what CAS provides, which is along the lines of assessing and tracking what your application portfolio looks like. And on the other side, it helps you identify security gaps that you may have in your code base. So as an example, let's say your application is built on Java and you're using some of the libraries that have been deprecated by Java, I don't know, let's say a couple of years ago. It'll point out those modules in the code base that are deprecated and give you recommendations on updating some of the code base. So you can identify, and that's true not just for open source, but also for third-party systems. So it helps you identify where there are gaps in terms of security as you move through this transformation phase and address those gaps. And eventually it gives you this single pane of glass for your entire application portfolio, identifying which ones are cloud ready. So if you look at the screenshot here, you can assess the cloud readiness of a particular application within the portfolio on the x-axis and look at the business impact that it has on the y-axis. This information is gathered by two different activities. One is the code scan, which we'll look at in just a bit in the demo, and the other is the survey. So there's a survey component to it where you as the app owner or you as the consumer of this portfolio identifies some of the characteristics associated with that app, like business criticality. And then mapping those to this chart, you can look at which apps have the largest footprint, which are the apps that are most cloud ready and business critical and have a higher business impact, and make a decision based on that information. Quick look at the process of what that transformation of an app would look like. So obviously there's swim lanes in terms of activities identified. There's the initiation, which happens within the organization itself. There's the component of assessing the application, which includes, like I mentioned, the code scan as well as the survey, which happens where CAS represents visually what we just saw in terms of screenshots, but also helping you make that decision. And then getting the application transformed, not just from the code perspective, but also in terms of the various methodologies that need to be updated to now accommodate this cloud native environment, is where Keyva can help. You can also now set up, either leverage the existing release process you may have, or you may need to set up some additional tasks and activities and maybe make some changes to the release process. And you may have a DevOps pipeline already where you have the current application version flowing through, but now you may say you transform the application to cloud native, you have the application divided into various microservices that are repeatable modules, if you will. You may need to make some changes to the DevOps pipeline, or you may just need to set it up from scratch. That is again where Keyva can provide services around the activity of not just setting up the DevOps pipeline, but making sure the applications are ready to flow through that pipeline. And there may also be a need to integrate this entire process with other third-party tools. And what I mean by that is you may have a change release process, you may have ticketing systems you need to account or you need to integrate with, you may have a CMDB where you want to put entries for specific CIs that the application is running on, how those CIs are related to each other and things like that, which is where Keyva has a lot of expertise. And then once the application has been assessed and it's been transformed, now CAS can help on making sure that as you make releases to the code base of that application, that you're not drifting away from the targeted metrics. So for example, if you have a metric around software resiliency, you want to make sure that as you make code changes, once the application has been transformed to cloud native, as you make code changes and new releases, that you're not drifting away from a specific target metric you may have. So that is again where constant review from CAST, sort of like an automated assessment, if you will, for that application code base can help as new versions and new patches are released. So having gone through all that, what are some of the next steps? Where do I start, right? That's where we got started from. And so there's a couple of technical next steps that you can take. One is that Keyva has developed an Ansible role. So before I get into what that Ansible role is, let me also, for folks who may know Ansible or for those who may not, Ansible is an open source automation framework for automating IT tasks. So let's say you have a task or a need to deploy an application instance end to end. You can use something like Ansible to automate the deployment of it. Obviously, there may be things within the deployment process that you already may have scripted, but Ansible provides the overarching orchestration layer, and again, it's open source, so it's pretty prevalent in our client base and I'd say in most industries where IT automation is a need solved by Ansible. So what we have done is we have kind of extended that Ansible platform and developed this role that will allow the consumption of CAST API. It's all on the back end. You don't need to worry about how to use the API, what the API is, and we'll see an example of this during the demo. But it allows you to leverage Ansible and do an automated assessment of an application you may already have sitting on one of the servers or systems that are managed by Ansible. And actually, maybe managed is not the right word, because Ansible can target any system that you have within the environment. So as long as you have an application hosted on a particular system, regardless of the operating system, and you have Ansible in the environment, we can leverage this role to automate that. Alternatively, if you don't have Ansible, you can also use a shell script wrapper that we've developed to kick off the CAST discovery process, if you will. And again, there's no need to understand the API and the technical defense, but this is all shared on GitHub. So it's a project that you can check out, and it has associated documentation with it on how to use the script. So anybody who has access or the ability to run a shell script can use this wrapper. And obviously you're free to choose, whatever works best for you. But if you don't have the ability to use either, we can help integrate whatever your config management system may be or your discovery tools may be to extend those systems to allow running this assessment via CAST. So if you have a third-party configuration management system that you use and you want to use that to do the assessment, we can help you build that extension as well. Now, one key point I want to highlight here is that at no point of this assessment will your code base ever be uploaded anywhere. We do not do anything with the code base. CAST does not leverage. The only thing that CAST does with the code base is scan it for specific characteristics that it then exports into a file that can be uploaded into the platform to view the visual representations. But at no point is the code base ever taken out of your environment. So let's take a look at what this Ansible role is, how it works, and it might give you a better idea for how you can automate some of these things. So what we have here, this is an Ansible Tower screen. Let me make sure I'm not logged out. Okay, so this is an Ansible Tower screen, and what we have done is we have defined a job within Ansible Tower. So without getting into details about the Ansible side of things, the idea is that we have defined a trigger for automation within Ansible. And before I hit that trigger, let me show you what the CAST platform looks like. So here's my home screen. And what we have done is we have created a bucket, if you will. We have created a shell for where we want that automated assessment to sit in. So we have this bucket for a Java app that was created within Cast, and when I hit the trigger for this automation, it's going to populate that bucket with the characteristics of that particular Java app. So I'm going to kick off this job. And at this point, again, on the back end, things are happening where the automation that's developed by Keyva is making calls to Cast. It's running that integration. And while it's doing that, let me quickly walk you through what I mean by this tag. So as I mentioned, within the Cast platform, there's two ways to assess an app, not two ways, two components rather, to assess an application. One is the code scan, which we are running right now. We've downloaded a sample Java application. It's hosted on a particular system, which Ansible is targeting to run the code scan on. But the other component of this is the survey. So anybody who wants to do an assessment will be given a set of questions. You can customize these questions to your organizational needs, and it kind of deduces what the cloud readiness and the business criticality looks like, because it's going to be different for every customer. Even if it's the same app, the criticality obviously levels will differ based on what the business is. So so the automation that was triggered has now finished, and just to kind of give you an idea, when the trigger happened, it would have shown here that a scan is going on, but since the scan is finished, we'll come back here, refresh the screen. And what you'll see is that these characteristics of the application have been filled in. So if I open up this particular page, here are some of the things that were auto-discovered. Again, these are just properties of the application. At no point is the code ever uploaded. But these properties give you a visual and an insight into how big the code size is, how many files are there, and then Kevin, who is going to walk us through what these properties mean in detail, and also give us an idea around. So this is just for one application. What would it look like for an entire portfolio of applications, which is going to be quite impressive if you have thousands of applications. It gives you that detail in a visual format. So I'm going to transfer the presentation rights to Kevin, and Kevin, you should be good to go.
Thank you, Anuj. So as Anuj said, we're going to see two things. First, looking at what do the results look like into Cast Highlight once you've done that code scan and that survey questionnaire, and then how does that roll up at the portfolio level, at the enterprise or organization level, into a migration, a cloud migration roadmap, or at least something that to help you identify the right candidates. We start at the low level for one application. So what I'm showing right now is one application called Blue Skies. We have analyzed it already through the code scan. Why not through an Ansible job like Anuj just showed us? That kind of guarantees that it's going to be automated. I'm going to have continuous results, and I can monitor the trajectory of any modernization effort. But anyway, I do have results. So let's look at the results. At a high level, the first overview of an application is basically a scorecard that shows you scores between 0 and 100. So higher is better, and for each dimension, you kind of want to have the best score possible, or at least the right amount of investment for an amount of health and cloud readiness that is acceptable for this application. So we do measure software resiliency through a code assessment, which is a view into the stability and the efficiency of the application. So is it performing well in production right now based on the patterns that we see in the source code? The agility has to do with how easy it is to modify the source code, to add or modify functionality, or maybe respect a new regulatory constraint. Basically, how quickly am I going to be able to modify my code to change my application? And then we measure elegance, which is a measure of the complexity of an application, telling you basically for that amount of functionality that you want to introduce, how messy is the code base associated with it. So those first three, we call them health measures. They're not the subject of the topic today because they don't help you directly in a cloud migration strategy. However, like Anuj said, they're really relevant when you want to do cross-analysis, right? And compare application based on multiple factors that come from a cloud-ready perspective, but also a health perspective, to make sure when you do the modification needed to move the application to the cloud, you're not degrading the user experience on other fronts, basically. All right, so the last one, the last metric on the screen is the Cloud Readiness Index. It tells you that this application out of 100 scored a 57.7. So let's look at the detailed results to understand why that result is 57. So two components to assess the cloud readiness of an application in Highlight. The first one is the survey. So it's a set of questions that you can answer in a couple of minutes, maybe 10 or 12 of them, to get a sense of a few parameters that we cannot gather from the source code. Right? So it gives us a view that is a little bit more complete, that will bring additional value to the actual code scan. But the meat of it is in the code scan. So that application contains two technologies. So you see C# and T-SQL. And we've analyzed both, basically. So we can deduce cloud-ready patterns and cloud-ready scores for about 5 or 6 technologies. That include C#, Java, T-SQL, SQL, but also your JavaScript, your PHP, or Python. So basically all the web languages that do matter, we support them in CAST Highlight. And the list that I see below is a list of all the patterns that were applied to that code base and how much of them were found, how frequent they were into the code base. Those patterns, they range from, multiple dimensions. We are going to check for 2 big categories. Basically, the patterns that are going to prevent you from moving to the cloud, because once you lift and shift your application, dependencies exist, and they're probably going to break if you don't address them head-on before moving. These, we call them blockers. It's a dependency to my file system. So for example, we have a pattern using file system, right? I'm doing manipulation on files, I'm opening them, and I'm changing them, saving data into them. If I just blindly lift and shift my application, the file system, or the file system I'm used to on-prem, is maybe not going to be available. So it's not a guarantee. So I need to check in that specific file for any file manipulation that is happening to make sure the file system is going to exist in the same characteristics in the cloud. That also has to do with the checks that we do on the OS front, right? So we're looking at DLLs or maybe COM components that are being accessed and used. So in the example of the COM components, I have 32 occurrences, so 32 files, in which we do have dependencies to COM components that need to be checked before even attempting to move. If I'm not really sure what COM components means, by the way, all those patterns are documented. I just click on the question mark. It's taking me to the documentation of CAST Highlight to explain exactly why I should care about that specific pattern and what will be the impact of remediating the code, of changing it so that it will work in the cloud. So in that example, I will definitely need to change the code, but it's maybe going to break the frameworks that I'm using, because those COM components can bring frameworks into my code. That's the first kind of broad area. The second broad area are what we call boosters, which is the opposite, which is I've already maybe done my lift and shift, I'm already in the cloud, but to design my app for the cloud, right, to turn them into cloud natives, as Anuj mentioned, I probably want to leverage all the services that are offered in the cloud that guarantee that my application will scale well in the cloud. So those patterns are the one that we put in green in the screen to tell me this is actually not something that you need to fix. This is something that you need to encourage. So we are detecting it. You're using a cloud-based encryption mechanism. This is a good thing. Please keep doing it. This will bring definitely value to your application to have it coded that way, leveraging the scalability of the cloud. Right. So two complementary aspects that help in a kind of lift and shift approach, looking at things that will break, but also looking at designing the application for the cloud through the boosters. Now, you've maybe noticed that some of the patterns have a mention of a platform in them. This is because they are specific to one of the vendors out there. So we do have patterns for Azure, for AWS, for Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and we are developing some for Google Cloud as well. That kind of help you if you've already decided on which platform you want to go to. They help you kind of be really specific in the way you develop the applications, but they can also be help in deciding which platform you want to use from a technical perspective by giving you, I mean, the effort associated with migrating to Azure is definitely high in that case because they have all those things to fix. However, maybe on AWS, that's not the case because I don't have so many blockers for AWS. So that could be an influence on the choice from a technical perspective. And then all this information roll up. There's a weight associated to each and every pattern, rolls up into a score that we combine with the Cloud Ready survey to end up with that 57.7. That tells me that this application is has some work to be done on it before attempting to lift and shift or to design it for the cloud. From an application level, that gives me a lot of data to do an assessment that I can export to Excel if I want to share that with my development team and they want to actually address some of the items that we mentioned. They will get a list of the patterns that were detected, but also the specific files in the code base that they would need to look into to fix the blockers that we've identified. So it's a kind of an actionable view that you can share with the team. But if you're still deciding, right, which are the good candidates to move to the cloud, the view that you probably want to use is a higher level view. It's a view that combines the results of Blue Sky, but does the same thing for all the other applications in my portfolio to come up with some kind of a practical waved migration to the cloud. So this is the screen that we propose in Cast Highlight for a portfolio level that shows for all the applications in my portfolio that were analyzed, a matrix on the x-axis that gives me the cloud readiness. So each and every app, each and every dot being an application, all the application on the right-hand side are close to 100, so they're close to being migrated to the cloud. Their cloud readiness is high, elevated, so ready to move to the cloud. On the y-axis, it's the business impact, which is a metric that we derive from the survey. So it's a qualitative metric that gives me an idea of the importance of that application in my portfolio, which application is revenue generating, exposed to my customer, and critical, that needs to run constantly for my business to be powered. So that matrix, that view, is the tool to use to identify buckets of application to set up a cloud migration strategy at a very high level. Okay, using a methodology of quadrants, you can kind of guess that all the applications that are on the top right corner are applications that are critical to the business and ready to move to the cloud. So those are the applications where we're going to unlock most of those savings associated with moving to the cloud, because they are probably carrying the most load, right? The customers are probably connecting to these portals, and they are the ones that are running constantly, right? So it makes sense to move them to the cloud, unlock those savings. However, the ones on the bottom right corner are applications that are ready to move to the cloud and not so critical for the business. So these applications are good candidates to, and if I zoom in, to whet your appetite and try to move applications to the cloud without too much impact on the business if something fails. So it's a good way to crawl before you walk, to target that specific set of maybe 10 applications and get your skills up before you attempt to move the large application. So using a quadrant strategy like this, you can continue by saying the business critical applications that are not ready to move to the cloud are long-term bets. That's something I need to focus on later on in my strategy. It's not where the actual value is. And we definitely in the bottom left corner have applications that might not be right candidates at that stage to attempt a transition. Right, so we've seen at the application level a very objective view on the cloud readiness of the application that stands on first a code base analysis, second a survey questionnaire to kind of get a qualitative view that is actionable, you can use and share with the development team, and sometimes platform specific if you have a specific need, that then rolls up into a high level view that tells you for each and every application what are the parameters that we know from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective, from an objective and a subjective perspective, to kind of help you identify very quickly the right candidates to move to the cloud. And with that, Anuj, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So, as we saw, CAST does a great job of highlighting and identifying which applications or what the characteristics of those applications are and how we can make informed decisions. What Keyva helps you with is making sure that we assess your portfolio. Let's say you don't want to put the entire portfolio in CAST step 1, that we help you identify these applications that you want to start with, but also the entire life cycle around the application, including implementation of recommendations that come out of the CAST platform. And then baking that new code base, the transformed application, into the DevOps pipeline, making sure that you have associated processes, methodologies associated with the new transformed application. Now, the good news is we are offering a free assessment for your first application for either Java or Python technologies. And as we showed in the demo, we will be leveraging some form of automation to conduct that assessment. Now, for you as a customer, you don't necessarily need to have access to the CAST Highlight platform right now, which is where we can, and we provide the automation to you to be able to run the assessment scan. Once you share those results back of the scan, again, which does not include any of the code base, we will walk you through what it looks like on the CAST platform. So Keyva will help you automate the assessment discovery, if you will. We'll provide you the automation to kick off the assessment and then walk you through that visual representation in the CAST platform. We will also help you understand the level of effort associated with the required application changes, whatever recommendations come out of the platform, as well as there may be other changes you need to make within the application. So addressing any specific security gaps, you may have to refactor the application, you may have to convert the application into a microservices architecture. So things like that is where Keyva can help. Obviously, there's going to be people, process, and tools around the application, which is where we can help. So understanding how the application is connected to your infrastructure, essentially helping you deduce the impact the application is going to have once transformed, and even where it is today, kind of give you a as-is view of what it is today, what are the different systems and people and other applications it touches and affects, and then give you a to-be recommendation, if you will, which will show you what the end state would look like. We'll build a short-term and a long-term roadmap approach, give you a transition path to going from where you are to being cloud native for that first app. We'll also talk about who the stakeholders are going to be, who they are now today, and who they will be, how much time do we need from different team members, what are going to be the different profiles and roles associated during this activity. You may need to talk to architects, for example, or senior DevOps engineers, or whatever it is, depending upon the size and scope of the application, will help you outline that upfront and then help you with that effort, as well as for the entire portfolio as well. And then tools rationalization is an activity that will likely need to be undertaken at some point once you get that scale of identifying, again, maybe 1,000+ application you want to move, and you want to make sure that the processes and everything else is efficiently migrated. That's where you may need to look at not just the tools aspect, but again, people, process, technology, they all go together when such an activity is undertaken. And then we'll be right there to help you make go, no-go decisions based on what the app looks like, how deeply entrenched it is. Maybe you have a lot of technical debt associated with that application, so there may be other things to consider, but basically giving you an entire total cost of ownership view into whether it would be feasible, cost-effective to move that to the cloud and what it would look like. So yeah, feel free to reach out for this. Again, we offer this free assessment leveraging the Cast Highlight software. You as a consumer do not need to worry about having access to Cast. You can leverage the automation that Keyva has developed, and we can walk you through the results of that assessment. So there's the link, keyvatech.com/survey, where you can get started, and hopefully this helps you get going on your journey towards transforming your entire portfolio of applications to cloud native. And with that, Kim, we can open up if there are any questions in the chat window.
So everybody who's online, feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, and either Anuj or Kevin will be happy to answer them.
Or if there's something that you guys think that we missed, or if you have any other comments or feedback to maybe even make this the free assessment that's being offered more effective or more relevant for you, please do definitely let us know.
Anuj, where do you see your clients kind of get stuck at what phase? I know you have a bunch of areas that you are able to help your clients with, but where's the most common area where folks get stuck in this cloud migration journey?
So what we have seen is obviously there's some sort of analysis paralysis, right, before you even get started. So we feel that what we have seen is two separate things. One is that before the effort gets started, right, it's overwhelming the entire scope of what needs to be done. That now, again, I'm assuming that the clients that I'm referring to that you've worked with in the past are small, medium, large-sized shops, but specifically around customers who have maybe 1,500 to 2,000 applications, right? They just don't know where to start. Every team, obviously there's going to be multiple teams, application teams that own different sets of applications, and they all have their own priorities. So that's where we've seen the most time spent on identifying at an organization level, not just at a team level, not just at a silo level, but at an organization level, what is important, which is where looking at that screen that Kevin was showing about showing the entire portfolio along with business impact really comes into play. But even if you don't, again, if you do not have Cast today, we can help you conduct that exercise to move forward. So that's one. the other point that we've seen where people get paralyzed is they've already started on the journey, but then they've made a discovery as they're moving through the journey that there's going to be, either a whole lot more of time or cost that's going to be associated and needed to fulfill where they're going. And it's one of those things where maybe the journey was started and appropriate assessment was not done upfront, which is why sometimes you discover things. I mean, nonetheless, you're going to discover things as you move through the project, but it just, this platform, along with what we are trying to do here, will provide you an insight, will provide you an informed decision rather than getting started for the sake of getting started and then getting stuck, knowing that you now got to spend a bunch more time and money. So I feel like when you're getting started would be an ideal time in my mind. But again, say you've gotten started, you've gone through this process, there's an entire paradigm shift that happens once you transform an application to cloud native. And then, as we saw, the monitoring of the application is going to be a different process, different tool. So the entire people, process, technology aspect, again, is one that I'd say is not where organizations get stuck per se, but it's one that they face the most resistance and spend the most time on.
Okay. So I see that you're making this offer available until the 1st of November. And I'm assuming that based on your answer that folks that are starting up the journey can take advantage of it, and also folks that are in the middle of their cloud migration journey could take advantage of it as well.
Yep, exactly.
Correct?
Yep, that's correct. That's exactly what I described. We could be at any point of the journey. The idea is to let us help you offer that free assessment regardless of which point you're on, and kind of allow us to give us our insights into what that process looks like for you. Yes.
Great. Okay, well, Anuj, thank you, and Kevin, thank you. This was very informative. For the folks that have attended, we are going to send out the presentation as well as the recording of this webinar to you. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.